A security guard stopped Pam Bondi at the courthouse door over a tiny flag pin, and hours later, a judge's career was in ruins. You won't believe what just happened. It happened in less than 60 seconds, but it would echo across the country for months. Pam Bondi stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the early morning sun reflecting off the small American flag pin on her navy blazer. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete as she approached the security checkpoint, her expression calm, focused, unshakable. She had walked into dozens of courtrooms before, confident, prepared, respected, but this time was different. This time, she never made it past the front door. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to remove that pin," said the security guard, his voice flat but firm, gesturing toward her chest. Pam paused, blinking in disbelief. "I'm sorry?" she asked, tilting her head. "The new regulation states that no political symbols may be displayed inside the courthouse," he replied, tapping a laminated sheet on the desk. "That includes campaign slogans, religious icons, or national flags." It was surreal. A former attorney general, an officer of the court, being told that a 2-inch American flag was a threat to courtroom neutrality. She glanced behind her. An older veteran, maybe late 60s, wearing a faded U.S. Army cap, stared with disbelief. A mother holding her young son pulled him close, whispering something under her breath. Tension rippled through the crowd like an unseen tremor. Pam adjusted her blazer. "This pin isn't a slogan," she said, her voice low but resolute. "It's the American flag." "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside, ma'am. You're delaying others." "You're denying a constitutional officer entry over a flag?" "Ma'am, please don't make this harder than it has to be." He didn't yell, he didn't shove, but the message was clear. Pam Bondi was not welcome. Not unless she removed the symbol that represented the very Constitution she had sworn to uphold. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She took a single step back, opened her bag, pulled out her phone, and hit record. "This is Pam Bondi," she said to the camera, her voice steady, almost surgical. "I've just been denied entry to a public courthouse because I'm wearing a U.S. flag pin on my jacket. No slogans, no statements, just the flag. That's it." Gasps echoed behind her. A young woman began to film on her own phone. The veteran from earlier saluted her silently, his eyes welling up with rage. Pam didn't yell. She didn't protest. She didn't argue. She just stood there, straight-backed, calm, with the camera trained on the guard, who now suddenly looked uncomfortable under the weight of the moment. By noon, the clip had already reached 6 million views. By sunset, it had become a cultural wildfire. At that moment, nobody knew what this incident would spark. Not the security guard, not the court, not even Pam herself. But the country was watching, and something deep inside them was stirring. If this opening shocked you as much as it shocked the courtroom, if you believe in the power of one person to stand tall when the system fails, hit that like button and comment the number 9 below, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Pam Bondi wasn't just there to attend a court hearing that day. She was there to represent someone in a case that had the potential to shift precedent on religious expression in public schools. But that detail got buried. All anyone could talk about was the pin. By the time she got back into her car, still wearing the flag, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters, friends, former colleagues. The clip had been picked up by 2 major cable networks. A banner rolled across the bottom of one screen, reading, "Former Attorney General denied entry for wearing U.S. flag." Pam sat behind the wheel, watching it all unfold through the windshield like the opening scene of a political thriller. She wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry, but she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't going away quietly. And neither was she. Because the courthouse door may have closed that morning, but in doing so it opened something much bigger, something national, something unstoppable. And it all started with a tiny 2-inch flag. By the time Pam Bondi walked through the doors of her home office, she had over 42 missed calls, 13 voicemails, and a dozen interview requests stacked in her inbox. She didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, she walked straight to her desk, placed her phone down, and stared at the small American flag pin still clipped firmly to her blazer. She didn't remove it. She didn't even consider it. Outside, protests had already begun forming in front of the courthouse. It started with a few veterans and moms, but by late afternoon the sidewalk was lined with flags, hand-painted signs, and chants that grew louder by the hour. One sign read, "If the flag offends you, the problem isn't the flag." Another, "Let Pam in, let freedom in." Inside, courthouse officials stayed eerily silent, not a single press release, not one apology, not even a correction. Instead, they doubled down. Late that night, a quiet update appeared on the court's website. All persons entering the courthouse are subject to decorum policies designed to preserve neutrality and order. Neutrality. That word echoed in Pam's mind like a dare. She had spent her career fighting for constitutional clarity, religious liberty cases, parental rights, freedom of speech. But never had she imagined that something as simple as a flag would become the battlefield. And yet, deep down, she wasn't surprised. It had been building for years. This moment was just the match that finally lit the powder keg. The next morning she appeared on national television, stone-faced, measured, every word deliberate. "I've argued before the Supreme Court. I've stood beside governors and presidents. But I've never been told I was unfit to enter a courtroom because I love my country," she said. "This isn't about me. This is about the silent line they just crossed, and about what we choose to do next." The clip went viral within hours. Online, the hashtag #LetPamIn surged to the top of social media. Fox, OAN, and even parts of mainstream media began to circle the story. But it wasn't just conservatives speaking out. An independent journalist posted a video titled, "We just watched the courts ban patriotism in real time." It hit 2.5 million views in less than a day. Even people who didn't usually agree with Pam began asking the same question. When did the American flag become controversial? That afternoon, Pam received a direct message from someone who refused to identify themselves, only signed as Y. It read, "You need to see this. Internal memo attached." Pam hesitated, then clicked. It was a scanned document. Official header, time-stamped confidential. The subject line, "Targeted Protocol for Political Disruption Prevention." It outlined a new courthouse policy that included flag-adjacent symbolism likely to incite partisan identification, and listed American flag lapel pins, religious jewelry, and political color combinations as examples. Below that, a signature, Judge E. Grayson. Pam sat in silence. She had suspected, now she had proof. Judge Edward Grayson wasn't just tolerating this policy, he was the architect, and suddenly, everything came into focus. The smirk on the guard's face, the cold silence from court administration, the timing. It wasn't about decorum, it was about control. She printed the memo, slipped it into a leather folder, and walked to her kitchen. The TV was on, broadcasting live coverage from the courthouse steps, where more protesters were gathering. A young girl, no more than 10, stood at the microphone, holding her mother's hand. "My dad died with this flag on his shoulder," she said, her voice shaking, "and they told that lady she can't wear it." "That's not right." Pam blinked hard, then picked up her phone. She dialed a number from memory. "Senator, it's Bondi. I need 15 minutes in front of a camera and a chair at the oversight hearing. You're going to want to see what I've got." The senator didn't hesitate. "You've got it. Tomorrow morning." As she hung up, her eyes settled once again on the flag pin. This wasn't a symbol anymore. It was a challenge. The next battle would not be fought at the security checkpoint. It would be waged under oath, under lights, and under public scrutiny. And this time, Pam wasn't walking away. She was walking straight into the storm. The Senate hearing chamber was packed before the sun even touched the Capitol dome. Press crews jostled for position, their lenses trained on the empty seat reserved for Pam Bondi. Protesters outside waved flags, held up signs, and chanted in rhythmic waves. One of them wore a t-shirt that read, "A pin started a revolution." At exactly 8:59 a.m., Pam walked into the room. She didn't flinch. She didn't glance at the cameras. She wore the same navy blazer and the same American flag pin, only this time there was a new addition, a small golden eagle brooch beneath the pin, gifted to her overnight by a group of veterans who had driven 14 hours just to shake her hand. Senator Joseph Carver, chair of the Judiciary Oversight Committee, cleared his throat as she sat down. "Ms. Bondi, thank you for coming on short notice," he began. "The nation's watching." "I'm aware," Pam said calmly, her voice low but clear, "and so is the system that allowed this to happen." The room fell silent. Pam reached into her folder and pulled out the internal court memo. She laid it flat on the desk, turned it toward the senators, and tapped the header. "This is not speculation. This is not internet rumor. This is real policy signed and implemented by Judge Edward Grayson less than 24 hours before I was denied entry for wearing a pin that represents this country," she said. Murmurs rippled across the chamber. Senator Carver leaned forward. "Are you stating that the court intentionally targeted symbols like the American flag?" "I'm not stating it," Pam replied. "I'm proving it." With precise prosecutorial clarity, she walked them through each paragraph of the memo, highlighting phrases like partisan identification and flag-adjacent expression. She referenced Supreme Court rulings on viewpoint discrimination and content-neutral regulation. She cited decades of precedent. And then she paused. "Yesterday, I was denied entry into a courthouse for wearing this." She touched the flag pin gently. "But today, I am not here just as a former attorney general. I'm here as a citizen. Because what happened to me is happening across this country, quietly, strategically, and under the guise of neutrality." The camera panned across the senators. Some nodded solemnly, others scribbled furiously. Then Pam dropped the twist no one saw coming. "Before I walked in here," she said, "I received a statement from a former clerk in Judge Grayson's chambers. Her name is withheld for safety, but her affidavit is here." She held up a second document. In it, she describes an internal email exchange where Judge Grayson refers to people like me as symbolic agitators, and where he expresses a desire to cleanse the courtroom of partisan visual pollution. That includes crucifixes, Bible covers, veterans' lapel pins, and yes, American flags. Gasps filled the room. Pam leaned in. "So I ask this committee, not as a political figure, but as a woman who walked into a courthouse believing she was protected by law, what else needs to happen before we act?" Senator Carver looked stunned. "We've subpoenaed Judge Grayson," he finally said. "He will testify tomorrow." Pam gave a small, tight smile. "I look forward to it." That evening, the clip from her testimony was everywhere. Cable news played it on loop. Social media turned her phrases into rallying cries. What began as a denied entry became a national movement. But the most unexpected moment came just before midnight. Pam's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Bondi?" the voice on the other end said, shaky and low. "I was one of the guards at the courthouse yesterday. I didn't agree with what we did, and I'm not the only one." Pam sat up straight. "Go on." "We were told to be ready for optics management. We were instructed not to allow anyone inside who might visually disrupt judicial order." I remember the phrase. It sounded strange, but we followed it. "We didn't know it would be you, we just—" He stopped, the emotion catching in his throat. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I wanted you to know that some of us knew it was wrong." Pam didn't speak for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You did more than you know just by calling." After the call ended, she sat there in the dark for a long time. Outside, the chants of protesters still echoed across the Capitol, but inside her chest, something deeper stirred. This wasn't just a PR war anymore. It was a reckoning, a reminder that behind every policy, every courtroom rule, and every moment of silence, there were real people, real choices, and real consequences. The system had tried to shame her into silence, but instead, it handed her a microphone. And now, the whole country was listening. The next morning, the sky over Washington was gray, but the crowd outside the Senate building burned with energy. Flags waved in every direction. Veterans in full uniform stood shoulder to shoulder with students, parents, and small business owners. Some held signs that read, "In God we trust, in Pam we trust." Others simply wore flag pins, hundreds of them, as a silent, unified answer to what had happened days earlier. Inside the building, the air was electric. Judge Edward Grayson walked in through a side entrance, surrounded by aides, chin lifted high, but with a face that looked far less confident than usual. The man who had once ruled a courtroom like a king was now summoned as a witness, under oath, under pressure, and under the nation's scrutiny. He adjusted his tie and nodded to the senators as he took his seat. Senator Carver wasted no time. "Judge Grayson," he began, his voice steely, "we are here today not to dissect policy, but to confront what appears to be a direct contradiction to the values of neutrality, fairness, and constitutional integrity." Pam sat in the gallery, her gaze steady, arms crossed. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was felt. Every camera cut to her. Every glance from across the chamber found its way back to her. Grayson cleared his throat. "My intent was never to discriminate. The policy was designed to maintain courtroom decorum in an increasingly polarized climate." Senator Carver leaned forward. "Then explain this," he said, holding up the now infamous memo. "Flag-adjacent symbolism likely to incite partisan identification. That's your language. Are you seriously testifying that an American flag qualifies as partisan?" Grayson looked cornered. "In this context, yes, there have been moments." "You mean Pam Bondi's moment?" Senator Martinez snapped. "Because all we've heard from legal experts, from citizens, and even from your former staff is that your so-called neutrality only applies when it silences people you personally disagree with." Grayson blinked, clearly rattled. Pam watched as the man who once smugly waved a contempt fine in her face now fumbled under pressure. And then it happened. The twist no one in the room had prepared for. A senator from the opposing party, one who had stayed mostly quiet until now, turned on his microphone. "I have here," he said slowly, "an internal email from Judge Grayson's office dated 6 weeks before the Bondi incident. In it, Judge Grayson refers to conservative female attorneys as, quote, rhetorical landmines wearing lipstick and patriotism." Gasps shot across the chamber. Even seasoned reporters looked stunned. Grayson's face turned pale. "That was taken out of context," he stammered. "It was a private—" "You were talking about federal officers, women who took oaths to defend the Constitution," the senator said, cutting him off. "And now, you're sitting here, pretending you were just trying to preserve decorum?" For a long moment the room was dead silent. Pam finally stood. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't need it. "Mr. Chairman," she said, voice clear, "may I respond to that comment?" Carver nodded. Pam turned toward Judge Grayson, not with malice, but with unwavering purpose. "Oh, I've been called worse," she said, "but what matters is not what he called us behind closed doors. It's what the system allowed him to do in the open. Because when he targeted my flag, he wasn't just mocking me. He was mocking every teacher who hangs that flag in their classroom, every soldier who fought under it, every immigrant who swore an oath beneath it, and he did it without blinking." The crowd in the gallery erupted into quiet applause, quickly stifled by Carver's gavel. But the message had landed like a punch to the chest. Pam walked to the center aisle, pulled a folded sheet of paper from her pocket, and laid it on the desk. "This is a motion," she said, "to formally request that this body open a judicial conduct investigation into bias-driven courtroom policies nationwide, starting with the office of Judge Grayson." The cameras zoomed in, phones vibrated in every pocket, reporters scrambled for headlines. Judge Grayson said nothing. For the first time, the man who once commanded silence in his courtroom had none of his own. He looked down at the table, then quietly removed his judicial pin and placed it next to the microphone. It was not a resignation, but it was the closest thing to surrender the public would ever see from a man like him. Outside, as Pam stepped onto the Capitol steps, the crowd broke into spontaneous cheers. Someone handed her a hand-drawn sketch, her standing with the flag pin glowing like a beacon, the courthouse behind her crumbling like stone. And for a split second, Pam smiled. Because this wasn't just a courtroom win, it was a line in the sand. A moment when the people stood behind the Constitution instead of the court, and a warning shot to anyone who thought silence equaled surrender. And they weren't done yet, not even close. The house was quiet that night, too quiet. Pam Bondi sat in her den, curled up on the edge of the same leather chair where she had once drafted closing arguments, prayed through tough decisions, and read letters from voters across Florida. Now she sat staring at the same American flag pin on her lapel, only it didn't feel like armor anymore. It felt like a weight, a symbol she defended in public with fire, but one that now dragged her into a moment of quiet doubt. The noise was gone, the cameras were off, the crowds had gone home, and for the first time in days, Pam was alone with her thoughts, with her past, with her name echoing across headlines in ways she couldn't control. Political crusader, hero or showman, Pam Bondi ignites national controversy over courtroom dress codes. It didn't matter how clean her motives were. The world didn't wait for nuance anymore. Every action, every pause, every look became a narrative for someone else's agenda. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from a longtime friend in Washington. You've awakened something powerful, but be careful, they'll come for you now. Pam turned the screen face down. She walked to the window, pulling back the curtain. The flag outside her home fluttered gently in the evening breeze. It used to make her feel at peace. Now it stirred something more complex. What if this had gone too far? What if, instead of igniting change, she was just adding fuel to the fire? She thought back to her early days, before Trump, before politics, just a young prosecutor, walking into rooms full of doubt and prejudice, and winning cases not with noise, but with focus, precision, facts. Back then, she didn't need the spotlight, she needed results. Was she still that woman, or had this movement turned her into something else? She sat back down, picked up a letter from her desk, one she hadn't opened yet. It was handwritten, no return address. Inside was a folded photo of a woman standing outside the courthouse. She wore a nurse's uniform with a flag pin on her collar. Scrawled beneath it in block letters, "I wore it because you didn't back down." Pam stared at the photo for a long moment, then flipped over the paper. There were only 7 words. Don't second guess what's already inspired millions. She exhaled slowly, the knot in her chest loosened. Just a little. Still, the weight hadn't vanished. The next day, Pam met with her legal team in private. The conversation was candid. If we push for a national review of courtroom bias policies, one advisor said, you'll be targeted, not just in the media. Judges, bar associations, state panels, they'll paint this as an attack on the judiciary itself. Another added, they'll accuse you of politicizing justice. Pam nodded. She'd heard it before, and deep down, she understood the risks. But then someone else spoke quietly. It was her youngest advisor, 26 years old, freshly out of law school, still green in politics, but burning with that stubborn kind of belief. We talk so much about risk, she said. But what about the cost of silence? Pam looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, you're the one who always said, silence enables the worst parts of the system. If you walk away now, they'll use your restraint as their justification. They'll say the public overreacted. They'll erase this from history like it never mattered. Pam said nothing. She just sat there, absorbing the words, and somewhere inside her, the flicker returned, that old courtroom fire, the one that lit up when she saw injustice and knew without a doubt it was her job to confront it. She stood. I'm not backing down, she said quietly, but I'm not shouting either. She walked over to a whiteboard, uncapped a marker, and wrote a single phrase across the top. Reform from within. We're not going to burn down the court, she continued. We're going to build the spotlight so big, so blinding, they'll have no choice but to change, or be exposed for who they are. Her team looked up. A shift was happening, not in the headlines, not in the crowds, but in Pam. This wasn't just about a pin anymore. This was about restoring the system without becoming like the ones who had broken it. That night, before going to bed, Pam walked back into her office. She opened a new document. At the top, she typed a title, National Code of Judicial Accountability, Draft 1. Below that, she wrote the mission, to protect fairness, not only in law but in tone, treatment, and access to justice for every citizen, regardless of age, gender, political view, or choice to wear a flag. She hit save, then walked over to the small glass case where she kept memories that mattered. Her father's service medal, her first law license, a signed Supreme Court brief from her first big win. She added one more item, the folded note from the anonymous nurse. She closed the case, turned off the lights, and whispered the words that carried her to sleep. This isn't about winning anymore. It's about repairing what's broken. And in that quiet moment, the weight on her chest finally felt like purpose. The courtroom was packed again, but this time it wasn't Pam who stood on trial. It was the system. A special session had been called at the federal courthouse in D.C., a rare, nationally broadcast hearing on judicial overreach, political bias, and the erosion of constitutional symbols in public institutions. Cameras lined the back wall, major news anchors whispered updates from their phones, and in the gallery sat rows of veterans, law students, teachers, faith leaders, and parents, some in uniform, some in suits, all wearing one thing in common, a flag pin on their chest. At precisely 10 a.m., Pam Bondi stepped through the courtroom doors. She walked alone, no entourage, no bodyguards, just her leather briefcase, and the same quiet conviction that had carried her through every storm. The room turned to watch, not with shock anymore, but with expectation, reverence. Today wasn't a reaction, it was a reckoning. The judge presiding over the session, a former Supreme Court clerk known for his fairness, welcomed Pam with a nod. "Ms. Bondi, this committee has asked for your findings and recommendations. The floor is yours." She stood behind the podium, straightened her notes, and spoke. "Thank you, Your Honor. What began as a moment at a metal detector has become a mirror, not just for our courts, but for our country. And I'm here to hold it steady while we look at ourselves." She paused, scanning the room. Over the last 72 hours, we've reviewed over 300 first-hand accounts from citizens denied access, dismissed, or reprimanded for wearing flag pins, religious items, or symbols of service inside courtrooms, not during protests, not during disruption, just for existing as who they are. She held up a printed email. This one's from a Gold Star mother. She was told to remove her locket, a locket with her son's photo in his Marine uniform, because it was considered an emotional distraction. Gasps swept the room. Pam continued, "I've built a team of legal experts, civil rights leaders, and former judges. We've compiled a preliminary proposal we call the Citizen Fair Access Act, a federal guideline that protects expressive symbols of national unity within courtrooms, so long as they do not interrupt proceedings or target others." She laid the folder on the judge's bench. "And second, we're introducing a nationwide judicial review portal where citizens can report patterns of bias without fear of retaliation. Verified patterns will trigger automatic audits by independent review boards." Silence, but the silence was heavy, charged, until the judge broke it. "Thank you, Miss Bondi. These are significant proposals. May I ask, why not just move on? You've already cleared your name." Pam looked him straight in the eyes. "Because this was never about my name." She turned to the gallery. "This was about the day a courtroom, a place meant to uphold the Constitution, told me that the very symbol of that Constitution was too political. And I realized in that moment, if I stayed quiet, I'd be helping them erase something sacred." She walked to the center of the room, then turned back. "Some say symbols don't matter, but I ask you, what's the first thing we salute as kids? What do we drape over the coffins of soldiers? What do immigrants swear under when they become Americans?" She tapped the pin on her blazer. "This little thing? It's not just fabric and metal, it's a promise." The courtroom erupted, applause rose like a wave. Veterans stood, a few wiped tears. The judge called for order, but his voice shook when he did. As the noise settled, the door at the back creaked open. All heads turned. It was Judge Edward Grayson. He looked older, thinner. He wasn't in his robe, just a gray suit and a solemn expression. Reporters scrambled, phones lifted. He walked forward, asked the judge for permission to speak. It was granted. Grayson took the stand not as a judge, but as a man who had seen his image crumble under the weight of truth. "I came today not to defend what I did," he began, "but to admit I never understood what it meant." He looked directly at Pam. "I thought neutrality meant eliminating conflict. What I didn't see was that in doing so I erased voices, I erased identity, I erased the flag I was sworn to protect." He took a breath, "And I thank Miss Bondi for forcing me to see that." He turned to the bench. "I resign, effective immediately. and I request that my courtrooms be among the first audited under her proposal. Gasps again. But this time, it wasn't scandal. It was redemption. Pam didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just nodded, acknowledging a man who, in the end, found the courage to stand down when truth stood up. The hearing concluded with unanimous agreement to submit her proposals to Congress. As Pam walked out of the courthouse, the crowd outside cheered like it was the 4th of July. But it wasn't celebration for one woman, it was relief for millions. Because, for the first time in years, justice felt like it had come home. Not by force, not by rage, but by unshakable truth. Calmly spoken, backed by courage, and sealed with a pen. And as Pam walked through the crowd, someone handed her a handwritten note that simply said, "You didn't wear the flag, you defended it." She folded it gently and kept walking. 3 months later, the courtroom where it all began no longer looked the same. The rusted security sign that once warned against unauthorized symbols had been taken down. In its place was a bronze plaque mounted just beside the main entrance. It read, "Justice isn't fragile. It doesn't fear the flag. In honor of Pam Bondi and all who stood silently until silence was no longer an option." Inside the courthouse lobby, a quiet buzz replaced what once was cold protocol. Court staff wore flag pins freely now, some tiny, others boldly styled, and no one questioned it anymore. What was once a moment of shame had become the very symbol of renewal. At the center of it all was Pam Bondi, not in a flashy, self-congratulatory way, but in the way people whispered her name in reverence, in the way young interns looked at her like she'd rewritten the rules not just of courtrooms, but of courage. She now served as chairwoman of the National Commission on Judicial Ethics and Public Access, a role created in direct response to the wave she had triggered. Her first action had been bold, launching a nationwide review of courtroom policies, targeting the gray areas where neutrality had long been used as a weapon against patriotism, faith, and cultural identity. But for Pam, the title was never the goal. It was the classroom that truly anchored her legacy. Every Tuesday evening, without fail, she taught a small seminar at Georgetown Law. The course was titled Justice and Symbolism, where the Constitution meets the human spirit. Attendance filled instantly each semester. Students didn't just come for legal theory, they came to understand how one person, one moment, and yes, one tiny pin could shake a nation awake. That evening, as the final class of the term gathered, Pam stood at the front of the lecture hall, holding a simple manila envelope. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of the journey. She opened the envelope and pulled out a copy of the original incident report from the courthouse, the very document filed when she was denied entry for her flag pin. She held it up so everyone could see the words stamped across the top. Violation, display of unauthorized symbol. A few students shook their heads, others clenched their jaws. Pam placed the paper down, then reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out the pin, the exact one from that day, still bright, still bold, still uncompromising. "This is the pin that started it all," she said, "but this wasn't the real violation." She paused. The real violation was silence. Years of it, silence when judges dismissed defendants with bias in their tone. Silence when security guards enforced vague rules that shifted depending on your appearance. Silence when young lawyers were told to blend in rather than stand out. She scanned the room, and the truth is I was almost silent too. I almost walked away that day. I almost told myself, it's not worth it, just come back tomorrow. But if I had, this conversation wouldn't be happening. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Miss Bondi, because of you, I changed my thesis topic. I'm writing about identity expression in federal courtrooms. I didn't even know this was an issue until you spoke up." Pam smiled gently. "It's always been an issue," she said. "It's just that no one wanted to name it out loud." After class, a dozen students stayed behind just to shake her hand. Some took selfies, others just said thank you. And as Pam packed up her notes, a young man approached, slowly, shy, nervous. He handed her a letter. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything," he said, "but I was in the courthouse that day. I saw everything. I was just an observer. a law student on assignment. I didn't speak up. I wish I had. But seeing what you did, it made me believe that maybe we can make the system better from the inside, not by burning it down, but by making it live up to its own promises." Pam took the letter, her eyes locking with his. "You just did speak up," she said, "and it matters more than you know." Later that night, back at home, Pam sat in her office. On the wall above her desk was a framed collection: her law license, her father's military badge, the original photo of the protest outside the courthouse, and beneath it all, the receipt for the $500 fine she never had to pay but insisted on paying anyway, because it wasn't about the money, it was about the message. Next to it hung a new quote, etched in glass: "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the pin you refuse to take off." Pam closed her laptop, looked out the window, and saw the American flag waving gently in the night breeze. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was defending it. She felt like she'd become a part of it. Because what started as a fine became a fire. What started as resistance became reform. And what started as a pin on her lapel became a symbol that justice, when challenged by courage, doesn't break, it rises. And now that symbol belonged not just to her, it belonged to everyone who believes silence is not neutrality, and that one voice, steady and sure, can still move the walls of power. The story of Pam Bondi's flag pin teaches us a deep truth. Courage isn't always loud, it's the quiet resolve to stand for what's right, even when the odds stack against you. One small act, like refusing to remove a symbol of freedom, can spark a movement, proving that individual conviction can reshape systems. In our own lives, this means speaking up when we see injustice, at work, in our communities, or even online, because silence often shields the wrong more than it protects the right. Pam showed us that change starts with one voice, steady and sure, challenging power with purpose. Apply that to your life. Don't wait for permission to make a difference. Thanks for watching this incredible journey with me. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. Hit like if this inspired you, and subscribe for more stories that matter.